A lot of good people who want to learn us a chance to do that. Some people need to for health reasons. So.
We'd rather than be here.
That's right. You're on to be here. So Gene had an announcement. You can take your mask off and make the announcement.
I'm just doing this because I'm too proud of
That's
it.
right.
I prefer not to wear a mask. But July 25th was yesterday. So we often think of Christmas in July, at least a lot of us do. So thinking of Christmas, Christmas child. So I wanted to announce for you folks that the school supplies are out. Instead of waiting till September, October, November to buy the school supplies, which you will pay 4 times as much for if you wait till then. Because there's like Walmart, Target, Staples. Now some people go to the dollar store, but you can get it a lot cheaper at the dollar store. Signs. But they don't have a big sale when they say that. But those places you can find those locals for a quarter, and normally you pay $1 or more. So I just wanted to say, start thinking about it. Of course, we do it all year long, but start thinking about gathering things that you find on sale, and then it helps you with what you can do. The packing one, maybe you can pack 2 free if you want and buy your things when they're on sale. And they definitely are doing it this year. And their goal is still 11 million, so they're really putting it to the Lord. Yep.
And how many boxes do you already have? Just want to get away to see.
82. Look, when they order sometimes, they have t-shirt and a jacket on sale for $1. So who can, it's not, I still have 3, if somebody can go. I don't have enough other stuff to put in anymore, but, it's like, yeah, so you want to, if you really call in, maybe you want. And we're making stuff. You have old t-shirts, we might be making jump ropes. So there's things you can make them good into.
We had talked about having an outdoor service today and decided it was too hot. But we'll try to do that in the near future. All right, guess who's in charge today? God's in charge. And that's not a new thing. He's always in charge. He's the sovereign Lord, and He is our King. And so we come together today to worship Him, to bow before Him, and celebrate Him. So let's go to the Lord in prayer together. Our Heavenly Father, we thank You that You are our sovereign God. You are our God. And You are sovereign. You have control of all things. And You are working all things together for Your glory and for our good. And that brings us peace. It brings us joy. And we come together here today. We rejoice that we can be together today. We can celebrate who You are. We can lift our voices in praise to You. We can honor You in every part of our being. We can worship and adore You. We can grow to love You even more just by the encouragement we have by being together and sharing together what we're doing in our lives. So help us to do that today. Help us to focus on You, to tell each other what You're doing in our lives and how You are changing us, and may we make that evident in how we love each other, and how we serve each other, how we submit to each other. And help us as we look to You to praise You today and to listen to what You have to say to us through Your word. May we honor You and glorify You in all we do today. In Jesus' name, amen. Wow. Our
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. You believe our God's a great God? Amen. God is great all the time. He's amazing. When we take the time to look and we can see what He's doing each and every day, even during a time like this pandemic. Today, the scripture reading is out of the book of Psalms. If your Bible turn to Psalm 126, we're going to read from Psalm 126 and 127. Again, Psalm 126 and 127. When the Lord brought back the captive ones of Zion, who were like those who dream, then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with joyful shouting. When they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. Restore our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. Those who sow in tears shall reap with joyful shouting. He who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. Unless the Lord builds the house, we labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors. For he who gives to his beloved, even in his sleep. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord, the fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate.
I told my mom, Daniel was coming. She looked at me and said, "Is your quiver full yet, son?" We're not yet.
Anybody know anybody famous? You know anybody famous? You ever get a chance to meet somebody famous? You ever get to meet somebody great? They're not one and the same, are they? Definitely not one and the same. But we get to know someone who is famous, but who is great. Or does he know you? Isn't it great to be able to know someone who is great and is famous and knows us? And he knows us better than we know ourselves. And of course, even better than that, is he wants us to know him. And he wants us to know him more and more and more. You know, some wants us to let him know. In fact, he wants us to tell it to him. Tell him things he already knows. Because then it shows that we're ready to admit those things. But he also wants us to dive in deep into the intricate things about him. He wants us to learn things about him, and to explore, struggle to find him. And that's the joy of getting to know God better and better, is we struggle to find out things about him. He wants us to investigate. Knowing him is great, and we must sing about it, knowing you, Jesus. It should be our great desire to know him more. All I want to tell you, fill my life along, all this world bring you, and more to to start out today, Nehemiah chapter 13, to start out, I wanted to answer 3 questions. The answer is yes, maybe, and no. I'm not going to tell you which questions it is. Tell you the answers, you don't need to know the questions. No, seriously, if anybody has any question on anything, go ahead and ask it. See, my answers are correct. Okay. Nehemiah chapter 13. We're going to take 2 weeks in this chapter. And next week, we'll still be in this chapter. And the following week, we're going to start the book of Romans. Well, that'd be fun. I make no guarantees how long that's going to take.
3 years.
Probably. Probably.
Maybe. Yes, maybe.
That's maybe. I have, in looking at what Bible books to start next, I've always kind of hesitated on the book of Romans. I was just, let me put that off for later. And finally, it's time to just do it after 36 years. It's time to start Romans. So we're going to do it, and let's see. I don't want it to take 3 years, but I don't want to do it in 2 weeks either. So there is a middle ground somewhere in there to be able to cover what a wonderful book it is. It covers so deeply the topics of salvation and grace, the very things that bring us together, right? The reason we're here is what Jesus did for us. So really interesting and fun and thought-provoking and convicting, all those things. But speaking of conviction, we're still in Nehemiah. And these are the books that are so convicting because they're wrapping up the Old Testament. Historically, not a whole lot happens after this with Israel. God still speaks to them through the prophets somewhat, but historically they're kind of getting wrapped up. Things are being wrapped up as they're now back in Israel. They're in Jerusalem, the walls are built, and they're reestablishing the worship of God the way it hasn't been for a long time. And something happens that Nehemiah has to go back to report to the king. And when he comes back, he finds out that all those promises didn't hold very long. He was only gone about a year. We don't really know exactly how long he was gone. But when he comes back, he finds out that all those things that they were so adamant about that they were going to do, that they were going to stand firm for God, and they were going to finally do this, they were going to follow the festivals, and they were going to give their first fruits and all of that, and they were going to take care of the priests and the Levites and the singers, and they were going to make sure the walls are in good shape and all those things. And when he comes back, he comes to find out, oh, no. And so we want to talk about being steadfast, being unmovable, and being dedicated, determined. Are you determined? What do you get determined about? You know, what are the things that you're determined about? Are you stubborn? Don't answer that to the person next to you. Answer that for you. Are you stubborn? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm glad a couple of us are. I'm stubborn. But what are we stubborn about? You know, what are we stubborn about? What are the things that we're going to stand firm in? We're finding out right now that in our country there aren't very many convictions. People don't have things that they firmly believe in. They can believe in something very firmly until the person next to them says, "Do you? Are you sure? What about this?" Or you get a Facebook message that challenges you, and I'm not so sure I believe in that. And then people rally around something, they don't even know what they're rallying around about. Let's have a protest. About what? I don't know. Go protest. Christians, and there's a funny term. What's that mean? What does it mean to be a Christian? Yeah, and they didn't used to be known as Christians, right? The early believers weren't known as Christians. That was a term unbelievers coined for them when they watched it. And saw what they did, because they're acting like Jesus. We're following that teaching of Jesus. But at the beginning, that's not what was. They were followers of Jesus. They were disciples, right? They were learners, they were followers, imitators of. We want to be that. We want to be dedicated to being that. But in order to be dedicated, firmly dedicated to being that, we have to know what that is. Right? We have to know what is it that we're following? What is it that Jesus taught? What did he teach? What did he do? Who was he? We have to know that, because in the world today, the term Christian doesn't mean a whole lot. It's very loose. A lot of people say they're Christians and have no clue what that is. And so that kind of ruins it for us who are really trying to follow Christ. So, what's that have to do with Nehemiah? Because Christ hadn't come yet, right? But he was firmly dedicated to following Jehovah, Yahweh, right? I found out this week that there's a new Bible coming out that's being printed. It's already in print next that. From the NASB version. It's called the Legacy translation. It's not a new translation, it's the NASB. But what they're doing is they're taking some words that weren't clear and they're clarifying them. For instance, in the Old Testament, the word for God. Now, this is a broad word, right? God. In the original manuscript in the Old Testament, God calls himself a number of things, different terms, but then he gives himself a name, Yahweh. He gives himself that name when he talks to Moses. So he says, call me that. And so many of the times in the Old Testament scriptures, that's what he calls himself, Yahweh. But then where does the Bible use? Our Bible. It says God. And so then sometimes it's confusing to know when is God calling himself God, and when is he using some of the other names that he uses, like Almighty or Provider. And there's reasons for that, right? So what this new translation does is it actually puts those names in. Essentially. So it's good for us to make it clear to people when we're talking about things, what we're talking about. So rather than just saying, I'm a Christian, and that may not mean a whole lot to a lot of people, we need to define our terms a little bit by our life. So we need to follow through. In other words, it could be confusing to someone if you say, I'm a follower of Christ, but then they watch your life and they say, I don't think he follows Christ. It might be believers that say that about us when they watch our life. Or it might be unbelievers. Sometimes unbelievers are more judgmental of us than believers when they watch our life. Because it doesn't follow what we say, right? And that's what's happening here with Israel, because they said they were going to do these things. They're now going to follow God, but in their life, they didn't really do it. So Nehemiah comes back, and he's in charge. What's he going to do? That's what we're going to find out. You ready? Are you sure? Because as we do this, I want you to ask yourself a question. Yes? Maybe? No. No. I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. One is, are you more dedicated to your spiritual growth or to your material growth? Are you more stubborn, following through, working hard on your spiritual growth, your spiritual well-being, or your material well-being? Because we're going to see what happened to Israel in that question. The second question we want to look at is, what have you put into, what or who have you put into the special room? Sometimes that special room in our life, which should be dedicated to God, we've dedicated to something else. Because we move God out and we put something else in, or someone else in. And maybe we need to reverse that process. It could be people, or it could be things. So keep those things in mind as we go through. Now, chapter 13. On that day, what day? The day that Nehemiah has come back. On that day, they read aloud from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. So remember before that they found these scrolls and they stood up to read them, and all the people could learn about things that they hadn't learned about in quite a while, or hadn't thought about in quite a while, and they dedicated themselves to the task of obeying these things. Well, this is another one of those days. And on that day, they read aloud from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and there was found written in it that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God. Does that mean the nation of Israel? No. Does that mean the city of Jerusalem? No. What's the assembly of God? The people, when they come together to worship. There you go. And where would that be? At the temple. Okay. So they've come together to worship at the temple, and there are certain groups that were, God had said, did they make this up or did God say it? God said in the law that these people cannot be allowed to be there. Why can't they be allowed? Well, let's read on. Because, isn't that great when the Bible answers our questions? Isn't that awesome? Because they did not meet the sons of Israel with bread and water. Is that all? No. They hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. So when they heard the law, they excluded all foreigners from Israel. Okay, so what had happened is, back when the Israelites were crossing over in all that wilderness and going to the land God was going to give to them, when they tried to go through there, they came to some territories and they said, hey, listen, we just want to pass through. Is that okay? We're not going to stay or anything. We want to come through. Can I cut across your cornfield? And some of the nations said, sure, go ahead. And even help them with food along the way. Okay. But some nations, namely these guys, said, no, you can't come through. Not only can you not come through, but we're going to hire this guy who's one of the prophets, and we're going to pay him money, because we know he's actually a prophet of God, because he'd already prophesied to us that it come true for what God said. He's a prophet of Israel. Okay? We're going to hire him to put a curse on him. So they paid him the money, and he was going to do it. Remember this story from Sunday school? Yeah. And what was he riding? He was riding a donkey. What happened? The donkey stopped. He said, what are you doing? I don't know if that ever happened to you. Hopefully not. Okay? And so instead, God gave him a blessing to put on Israel. Instead of the curse that he's hired you, he gave him a blessing. Isn't that neat how God does that? Sometimes your worst enemy is trying to do something to you, and God turns it into a blessing. Sometimes even you set out to do something that you think is a great idea, and God changes it to use it for something in your good. And that's what God did for him. So when he did that, God said, okay, because of this, no Moabite and Ammonite can ever be in. In fact, he said they should be wiped out. That never happened. But what had the children of Israel done? Instead of listening to God and keeping some things why does God want there to be a purity of people who worship Him? Because what happens when we let idol worshiping people into our worshiping family? It doesn't mean don't be friends with people, it doesn't mean don't be around them, it means don't let them worship with you when they worship over God. They're not worshiping. Who is the audience of the church? When we come together to worship God, who's intended to be worshiping God? God worshipers. Okay. So we don't aim, our target audience isn't people who don't do that. Our target audience is people who want to do that with us. Okay? But God had told them not to do that, but they had done that. They allowed other people. Why did they allow other people in? Why had they allowed outsiders in? What do they say when you're looking at investigations? They say, follow the money. Follow the money. Okay? And that's what was happening. So Israel had allowed their financial well-being to determine what they were dedicated to. So if you're going to be financially well off in the area, you need to have relationships with people in the area that lived around you. And since you're going to be doing trade with those people, wouldn't it be better, in fact, if you even got your son or your daughter to marry one of the people? And kings did this all the time, didn't they? All through history. What did kings always do when they wanted to have peace with another country? Marry off their kids, they wanted to have all the time. And it didn't start in the Middle Ages, it started way back. Okay, so this is what Israel was doing. And so because of that, they had all these people there that weren't supposed to be there. And normally when one of the men married a woman who was from another country, she raised the children. And so whose language did the children speak? The other languages. And so whose gods did they learn about? Isn't that what Solomon found out? Yeah, yes. So they're redoing all the same old things that Israel had done before. So you're going to find out that the problems that had caused Israel to have to be exiled were the same problems all over again. So Nehemiah can't let this go. He's got to do something. So what happened? Verse 3. So when they heard the law, they excluded all foreigners from Israel. From the country? No, from the assembly. From the worship. Okay? Now, prior to this, here's how bad it got and why. Verse 4. Prior to this, Eliashib, the priest, who we just read his name. Remember that list of names that we went through? We didn't know why we had to read those names? One of the reasons is because this guy's name is in that list. That he's the 2 generations after they came with Zerubbabel from Susa. He's one of the grandchildren. Okay? And he grew up and he's now priest. What does he do? He was appointed over the chambers of the house of our God, being related to Tobiah. Remember Tobiah? He's the enemy. He's the bad guy. These guys are supposed to keep out. He's the one who's going to trying to stop the work of the Lord. But Elisha was related to him. Well, how do you get related to him? Somebody wanted to let their kid marry somebody from the outside to make things financially better for their family. And who was this man that did that? He was actually a Levite. One of the heads of the Levite tribe. So, anyway, Eliashib, what does he do? Verse 5. He had prepared a large room for him. Well, that's okay. Or a room for father-in-law. Okay. Where formerly they put the grain offerings, the frankincense, the utensils, the tithes of grain, wine, and oil prescribed for the Levites, the singers, and the gatekeepers, and the contributions to the priests. He went into the temple. Okay, this isn't a house down the street. This is one of the rooms of the temple. They stored the room in the temple. And what did they store there? They stored the frankincense and utensils for worship and all the offerings that were given to support the Levite families. Okay? And he got all that stuff out of there, took it out. What business did he have doing that? Zero. He got all that out of there, and he called up father-in-law to buy it and said, hey, come on in. You can have a room right here. Not only can you live in Jerusalem, you can live in the temple. Now, if somebody offered you a room in the temple, you were a good Jew, would you dare take that room? Absolutely not. You had no business being there. But this guy wasn't even a Jew. And so he had no problem with that, so he moves right in. Now, when did he do this? Verse 6. During all this time I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had gone to the king, and after some time, however, I asked leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem, and I learned about the evil that Elijah had done for Tobiah by preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. It was very displeasing to me, for that's good. So I threw all of Tobiah's household goods out of the room. Well, that was harsh. You think that was the right thing to do? Was that a nice thing to do? Was that a loving thing to do? Would a good Christian do that? Absolutely. Are there times to take things and throw them out? Absolutely. Are there times to say to things that might be in our heart and in our life and have taken the place of God in our life? And see, sometimes it can be a person, can't it? What's replacing God in your life? What is causing you to have a more concern for your material well-being than for your spiritual well-being in your life? It could be things, or it could be a person, or a group of people. Think back to your teen years, or the things you did because your friends wanted to do it, and you knew it was wrong to do it. Why look back then? You're probably still doing it today, right? We still do it today. We get influenced by other people. And instead of doing what we know to be right for God, instead of being influenced, we let other people, what we've done is we've taken God and split him out and throw God's luggage out of the room, and we bring in other things. Could be a job, could be a hobby, could just be, I just like to do it. This is all right. And so we don't even read the Bible anymore. We don't study the Bible, which is what we ought to be doing if we want to get to know God more. But we don't do that because we're too busy doing something else. I don't have time to read the Bible. What? How many hours are in a day? I think there's less than used to, right? No, it's the exact same amount. Well, then how come I don't have time to read the Bible? How do I not have time to know Scripture, to know God? Because I'm busy doing other things. Then we've done exactly what Elijah did. Exact same. He's got called for what it is. So Nehemiah did the right thing. Okay? He didn't ask anybody. He didn't have a committee meeting about it. He didn't call a vote of the assembly. What should we do about this? No. He's in charge. He's the leader. Spiritual well-being of the people is on his shoulders. So he walks right in, takes all of Tobiah's stuff, and throws it out in the street. That's what we're doing. He said, get out. The next thing he did is he took the responsibility away from Elisha. Well, that's harsh. Are there times we need to do that? To take spiritual responsibility away from someone who isn't doing it and give it to people who will do it? Look what he did. It was very displeasing to me, so I threw out all of Tobiah's household goods out of the room. Then I gave an order. They cleansed the room. They fumigated the place. And I returned there the utensils of the house of God with the grain offerings and the frankincense. And look at verse 13. In charge of the storehouses I appointed Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, Pedaiah the Levites, in addition to them was Hanan the son of Zakur, the son of Ananiah, for they were considered reliable. These are reliable guys. And he took them from different realms of the kingdom. He took them from the priesthood, from the Levites, from the men of the people who were leaders, and he gave them the task to distribute to the kinsmen. Why? Because not only was there a problem of having the wrong guy in the spot, what happened to all the stuff that was supposed to be in there? If you don't have a room to store the supplies for the Levites, what happens to the supplies for the Levites? Nobody brings them anymore. There's no place to put them. So what happened to the Levites? They left. Verse 10. I discovered that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, so that the Levites and the singers who performed the service had gone away, each to his own field. Remember that they had signed up? Remember that? They signed up on the list. We're going to be in Jerusalem, and we're going to do the job. I promise. I'm going to do that. And then what happens on week 3 when they stop giving you a paycheck? And week 4, they're not giving you food anymore. And week 5, there's nothing there even to do the service with because all the stuff's gone. But what do you do on week 6? You go home. So the Levites all went home. All the singers went home. Was there any music in the temple anymore? No. Were there any Levites there to provide all the stuff and make sure everything was ready? No. So did the priests do their job? Nope. The Levites weren't there now. Rather boring service. No music, no Levites, no stuff. What did the priests do? Nothing. They all went home. What was going to happen to Israel? Down, down, down. So, Nehemiah knew he had to do something. So, verse 11. I reprimanded the officials. Oh, how dare he. He reprimanded the officials. Can you imagine being in his place? And I said, why is the house of God forsaken? Then I gathered them together and restored them to their posts. That was probably not an easy thing to do. The very people he reprimanded, he gave them back their responsibilities. He said, then you get back to your post and do your job. There are some jobs he couldn't give to somebody else. To be a priest, you had to be from the priestly family, didn't you? To be a Levite, you had to be from the Levite family. You had to be. So he had to give them their job back. And he told them to do their job. Then, verse 12, all Judah then brought the tithe of the grain, the wine, the oil from the storehouse. That's a huge thing. Once he reestablished the order of the leadership, the people responded. They jumped right in and they started bringing back the first fruits. You have to give them credit for that. They did what they were supposed to do once they had a leadership that was leading. So verse 14, Nehemiah says to them, remember me for this, oh my God. Do not blot out my loyal deeds which I have performed for the house of my God in this Jerusalem. What justified Nehemiah before God? What justified? I know we didn't get to Romans yet, but what justifies us before God? One thing. There you go. One word, faith, right? That's the only thing that justifies us before God. So what justified Nehemiah before God? His faith in God. But when he had faith in God, what happened because of it? He responded with doing the right thing. His righteous deeds came out of his faith. Okay? It isn't his righteous deeds that saves him, any more than it saves us. Our faith in Christ saves us. But if we have faith, James says, what will happen? Faith without works is dead. It's not faith. So faith is going to respond with deeds. So he says in verse 14, don't blot out what I've done remember what I've done. He's not saying I'm great. He just said I did it because I believe in you. And I'm asking you to do what you said you were going to do. All right, now we come to verse 15. Another demonstration to us that their heart was not in the right place comes out in a very basic example. Okay? Often when we go to the law, which is what we often look at to determine someone's faithfulness, we can see disobedience, and he's already shown us that. But now he's going to demonstrate something to us that goes beyond the law. It was before the law. Okay? And that is the Sabbath. He's talking about the Sabbath. In those days, same period of time, when he saw these other problems, I saw in Judah some were treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, as well as wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, and they brought them into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I admonished them on the day they sold food. Also men of Tyre were living there, who imported fish and all kinds of merchandise, and sold them to the sons of Judah on the Sabbath, even in Jerusalem. Then I reprimanded the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil thing you are doing by profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do the same, so that our God brought on us and all the city all this trouble? Yet you are adding to the wrath of Israel by profaning the Sabbath. What have they done wrong? They forgot a basic principle that God had given to Israel from the beginning, even before Israel. And then he said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, what was the Sabbath day? What day of the week? Saturday. Okay? Remember this day, because that's the day God said when I created the earth, and then I rested on that day, the seventh day, I didn't do anything. And I want you to remember me. Why do I want you to do that? Because you need it. You need the rest, okay? And more than you need the rest, you need to stop and think about me. That's the main thing. Stop, think about me. And so then for the rest of the history of Israel, and it was really implanted in the law, that on that day, you don't think about material things. You think about spiritual things. So to make sure that you're thinking about spiritual things and not material things, don't do anything to increase your wealth or to focus on your wealth that day. You just think about me, serve me. And that makes it awful easy to go to the temple to worship because, hey, there's nothing to do. There's no food to buy. Now, what happened is as soon as they built up the walls of Jerusalem again, all the other nations surrounding them who were being allowed even into the worship, they said, hey, let's bring stuff in because we can make a lot of money on the Sabbath. Because they're not working. If they're not working, they'll buy our stuff. So they all brought their wares into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. And everybody did. And they did so much that they got all involved in the material realm that day, and they lost focus and forgot about worshiping the Lord on the Sabbath. So Nehemiah says you can't do that. So not only do I have to get you to focus again, don't be working on. Now he's not being a Pharisee. He's not saying don't work, don't walk so many feet, and you can't tie your tie, or all these silly rules that the Pharisees had. That's not what he's saying. He's saying don't focus on material things, focus on the spiritual growth again. You need to focus, refocus, and to help you with that, I'm going to stop it. And so he went to the marketplace and he kicked the guys out. And he said, you can't be here on the Sabbath anymore. And in fact, I'm going to close the gates. I'm going to close the gates and you can't come in here anymore. Now they continued to do it. And they did it so much we're going to find out. Well, what did Nehemiah do? Well, let's see here. Verse 19. Oh, and furthermore, he said, what was the reason God sent you into exile with me? That was the reason God gave. In fact, when God determined the length of time they would be in exile, you know how we determine that? He said, here's how long you're going to be captive. for every Sabbath of the rest of the land, in other words, remember every 7th year they're supposed to rest the land? That was to further signify this Sabbath period. For every 7 years that you forgot to observe the Sabbath of the land, I'll give you 1 year of imprisonment. So you multiply that out, that's why they were out 70 years. 70 times 7. You ever hear that again? Yeah, that comes up again. That's 70 times 7. That's how long you disobeyed me. And so that's going to be used to figure out how long you're going to be in captivity. And they were. So Nehemiah says, that's the very reason we wound up in this predicament. Why are you doing that? Now, if your child was caught stealing cookies, I totally can relate to that. Your child was caught stealing cookies. And you said, okay, you're grounded because you stole cookies and you can't go anywhere for 2 days or whatever. And then you caught them stealing cookies again. And you could go to them and say, that's the whole reason you were grounded. They say, why are you doing this again? That's exactly what Nehemiah is saying to you. Right? Why are you doing the very thing that got you into this trouble? So it came about, verse 19, that it grew dark on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath. I commanded that the doors would be shut, that they should not open them until after the Sabbath. Then I stationed some of my servants at the gate so that no load would enter on the Sabbath day. And once or twice, the traders and merchants of every kind of merchandise spent the night outside Jerusalem. These guys are desperate. They're like, we want to get in. We're going to camp right outside. As soon as that door is open, we're getting in. Then I warned them and I said to them, why do you spend the night in front of the wall? If you do so again, I will use force against you. From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath, so they learned their lesson. And I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and become as gatekeepers to sanctify the Sabbath day. So part of the job of the Levite then is to guard the gates against wickedness. There's something we need to learn. How can we guard the gates against wickedness? That's as much a part of worship as it was to prepare the element. Just as much to guard the gate. For this also remember me, he says, O my God, and have compassion on me according to the greatness of your loving kindness. Nehemiah, some people would say, Nehemiah, you're just not very nice. Not tactful. Not loving. There's a time to be hard. And that time to be hard is the time when we're guarding the purity of our hearts. Now, all of us need to be responsible for that ourselves. We can't trust that to somebody else. We have to say, what is it that I need to guard against in my life? What is it that I sometimes have a temptation to allow that into that room where God belongs? Do I need to sweep it out? Or maybe do I need to take steps way before that? Maybe I need to put doors up at the walls that don't allow it in at all. Nobody can do that for you. Because most people don't know what's in your heart at all. The Lord tells us that our hearts are desperately wicked and deceitful. That means we even trick ourselves. We lie to ourselves. It's bad enough when you lie to other people, but when you lie to yourself, you really open up the gates to a lot of bad things. So we need to make a decision in our own hearts and minds that we will be firm, that we will be dedicated, more dedicated to guarding our hearts and guarding that room where God belongs than we would be to guarding our wealth. More dedicated to spiritual development in our life than we are to material development in our life. Now, some people think the older I get, the less I have to be concerned about that. No. That's not true. Because the older we get, the more tempted we are to be concerned with our physical well-being. We ought to be more concerned, not just with our own spiritual well-being, but with the well-being, spiritual well-being of others that are coming behind them. Just look at the example of Elisha, whose grandfather had come with Zerubbabel to reestablish the temple in Jerusalem. And only 2 generations later, what was he? He gave the room to a foreigner, the enemy of it. We need to guard our hearts and our lives from giving space to the enemy and keeping it to God. That's right. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you that you love us so much that in your grace you sent Jesus to win the battle for us, to give his life as payment for our sin. Help us, Lord, to be grateful, thankful, to trust you for all things, and to give our hearts to you in our life. Help us be good guards of the gates around our lives, that we might keep our hearts in the right place. We would not allow wickedness in, or allow our lives to be used by the enemy. We would honor and glory to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a wonderful day today.